Shh, we're inside. Quiet now. Easy, easy, you're safe. Just a little longer.
The rain came down over Chicago. That October night like it had something to prove. Dr. Alexia Whitfield was locking up her clinic when she heard it. Not thunder, not the hiss of tires on the wet road, something smaller. A sound so thin she almost let herself believe she had imagined it. She stood there on the step with her key half-turned, 34 years old, soaked to the collar, tired in a way that sleep does not fix. Behind her, the little sign above the door read Whitfield Animal Clinic, and the letters were peeling at the edges because she had never been able to afford to have them redone. Now, before we go any further, let me ask you something. If you believe that what a person does at midnight, in the rain, when nobody is watching and nobody is paying, if you believe that is the truest measure of who they really are, then you are going to want to hear the rest of this. Take 1 second and tap that subscribe button and turn on the bell so this story finds you again. And tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight. The sound came again, a whimper from the alley beside the building. Alexia had a rule she had learned from her father, who had been a veterinarian too, in a county outside Selma, Alabama, with a concrete floor and a single bare bulb and a line of pickup trucks at the gate every morning. Her father used to say, in that low, unhurried voice of his, that a doctor is only a doctor when it is inconvenient. Anybody can be kind at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. It is what you do at midnight that decides what you are. She put the key back in her pocket and walked into the alley. He was lying against the wall behind the dumpster, and at first she thought he was already gone. A dog. A big one. White, or he had been white once, before the mud and the blood had gotten to him. His ribs stood out under the fur like the frame of a boat. One of his hind legs lay at an angle that made her stomach turn over. She crouched down in the puddle, not caring, and put her hand out flat, slow, the way you do. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey there, I've got you." The dog opened one eye, just one, and what she saw in it was not fear, exactly. It was something worse than fear. It was the look of an animal that had already made peace with the ending and was mildly surprised to be interrupted. "No," Alexia said. "No, no, no, not tonight, not while I'm standing here." He was heavy. Later she would find out he weighed just under 48 pounds and that he had been closer to 70 once. But at that moment, he was simply more than she could carry, and she carried him anyway, arms under his chest and hips, her back screaming, her shoes filling with water, the alley tilting. She got him through the door. She got him onto the steel table. And then she stood there dripping, breathing hard, looking down at an animal that was almost certainly going to die in front of her, and she said the same 3 words her father had said over every hopeless case he ever took. Well, let's begin. Tessa, her assistant, arrived at 11:40 at night because Alexia had called her, and because Tessa was 23 and still believed that this was what the job meant. They worked until almost 4 in the morning. The leg was broken in 2 places, and it was an old break, badly begun to heal, which meant somebody had left him like that for weeks. There was a wound along his flank that had gone bad. He was dehydrated. His gums were the color of paper. Somewhere in the middle of it, his heart stopped, and Alexia brought it back with her hands and her breath and a stubbornness that had nothing at all to do with medicine. At one point, Tessa said quietly, "Doctor, the plate for the femur, that's the last one." Alexia did not look up. "I know. We can't order another until the account clears." "I know, Tessa." "And the anesthetic." "Tessa," Alexia's hands never stopped moving. "Hand it to me." She used the last plate. She used the last of the good anesthetic. She used $400 of drugs on a dog with no collar, no owner, and no chance, in a clinic where the electric bill had been sitting unopened on her desk for 11 days. At 4 in the morning, she stripped off her gloves and sat down on the floor with her back against the cabinet, because the chair was too far away. Tessa sat down next to her. Will he live? The girl asked. Alexia looked at the table, at the white shape breathing shallowly under the light. He's decided he will, she said. That's the part I can't do for him, the rest is just carpentry. Tessa laughed, exhausted, and then, because she was 23, she started to cry a little, and Alexia put an arm around her and let her. Outside, the rain kept coming. Alexia had come north for veterinary school and stayed for a residency, 1 year in and out. Then her father died, and going home meant walking into a house where the most important man in her life was not going to be standing in the doorway, and so she had stayed. 1 year became 2. 2 became 11. She had opened the clinic on a block in Albany Park that the developers had not gotten to yet, in a building that leaned slightly to the left, above a laundromat that ran hot enough in August to cook you. She had never once been able to say no to something dying in front of her. That, in the end, was the whole reason for everything that happened next. He lived. He was not grateful about it. For 3 days he lay in the recovery kennel and refused every kindness offered to him. He would not eat from her hand. He watched the door. Alexia did not push. She sat on the floor outside the kennel in the evenings with a book she was not reading and let him get used to the shape of her. She talked to him about nothing at all. The weather, the electric bill, her father. On the 4th day, she woke up at her desk at 6 in the morning and found that he had dragged himself out of the kennel in the night, on 3 legs, with a plate in his femur, which should not have been possible, and gone to sleep with his head resting on her foot. She did not move for an hour. She let her leg go numb. Okay, she whispered eventually. Okay, hello. She called him Moose. Because of the size of him and the shape of his head, and because Mrs. Wanda Cowell from the 2nd floor took one look at him and said, "That's not a dog. That's a moose," and it stuck. Mrs. Cowell was 78 and had lived in that building since before Alexia was born. She came down every morning with a thermos of coffee strong enough to strip paint and a running commentary on Alexia's life choices, most of them negative, all of them delivered with enormous affection. "He's a Jindo," Mrs. Cowell announced on the first morning, poking Moose with the tip of her cane in a way that Alexia would not have dared. "Korean hunting dog. My son had one. Look at the ears. Look at the tail. This is not a street dog, doctor." He was in the street. Being in the street doesn't make you a street dog, Mrs. Cowell sniffed. Sometimes it just means somebody put you there. Alexia thought about that for a long time afterward. Because Mrs. Cowell was right, and Alexia had already seen the evidence and had chosen, for 4 days, not to look at it directly. Moose sat when she said sit. He waited at doorways. He did not touch food until it was set down and released. Somebody had spent months teaching this dog manners and had spent money doing it, and then somebody had broken his leg and left him to rot behind a dumpster. Those 2 facts did not fit together. And in Alexia's experience, when 2 facts did not fit together, it was because somebody was lying. On the 5th day, she scanned him for a microchip. She had put it off, and she was honest enough with herself to know why. Because if there was a chip, there was an owner, and if there was an owner, Moose would leave, and she had already made the mistake of letting herself love him. The scanner beeped on the first pass. There was a chip. There had always been a chip. It sat under the skin between his shoulders, where anybody with a scanner could have found it in 2 seconds, which meant that in the weeks he had been out there, limping through the city on a broken leg, not one single person had bothered to check. Alexia typed the number into the registry lookup. The screen thought about it. Then it returned a result she had never seen in 11 years of practice. Record restricted, contact administrator. She stared at it. She typed it again, slowly, checking every digit. Same answer. "Tessa," she said, "come look at this." Tessa looked. Tessa frowned. Tessa said, That's not a normal registration. Regular people don't have restricted records. That's corporate, or somebody paid to have it locked." For a dog. For a dog, Tessa agreed. Alexia called the registry service. She was on hold for 19 minutes and then transferred to a man who took the chip number, went silent for a long moment, and then asked her, in a completely different tone of voice than the one he had started with, exactly where she was calling from. She hung up. She did not know why she hung up. She just knew that the temperature of that conversation had changed, and that in her experience, when the temperature of a conversation changes, it is time to get off the phone. 2 days later, the black car appeared. It was parked across from the clinic in the morning when she opened. It was there at noon. It was there at 9 at night when she closed. Nobody got out of it. The windows were dark and the engine was off, and it sat there with the enormous patience of something expensive. The next morning it was there again. Alexia stood at the window with her coffee going cold in her hands and Moose pressed against her leg, and she felt the fur along his spine rise, and she understood with a clarity that frightened her that the dog was not afraid of the car. He was afraid of who might be inside it. Stay with me here because this is where it turns. In just a moment, the man in that car is going to walk through Alexia's door and offer her more money than she has ever seen in her life, and the way she answers him is the whole reason I wanted to tell you this story. If you are still with me, type the words I am here in the comments so I know. And if this one has hold of you already, give it a like. It costs you nothing, and it helps this story find the people who need it. On the third day, they came in. 2 men in suits first, the kind of men who fill a doorway on purpose, and then a third man behind them, and Alexia knew before he spoke that the third man was the one who mattered. He was perhaps 36. He had a face like a closed door. His coat cost more than her surgical table, and he wore it the way a soldier wears a uniform without pleasure, because it was required. "Dr. Whitfield," he said, "my name is Han Yiwan." She knew the name. Half the city knew the name. Decent Group had its American headquarters 40 blocks south of where she was standing, and the name was on the side of the building, on the backs of ships, on the electric bill sitting unopened on her desk. "I'm with a patient," Alexia said. "You're not. Your last appointment was at 4. He glanced at the wall clock. "It's 6:20. "Then I'm closing." "You have my dog." There it was, flat cold, no preamble. Alexia set down the chart she was holding. Behind her, in the back room, she heard Moose get up. She heard the click of his nails on the tile. She heard him stop in the doorway. Han Yiwan looked past her, and something happened to that closed-door face that Alexia would think about for a long time afterward. It did not open, exactly. It cracked. "Namu," he said, very quietly, barely a word at all. The dog did not move. "His name is Moose," Alexia said. "His name is Namu." Yiwan's voice came back hard, and he pulled his eyes off the dog and put them on her, and now there was something ugly in them. "He has been missing for 4 months. He has a locked registry file, which you queried, and which flagged in my office within the hour. So let me ask you plainly, doctor, how much?" Alexia blinked. "I'm sorry." "How much do you want? People like you always want a number. So say it, and we can all go home." The room went very still. Alexia Whitfield had been called a great many things in 11 years of practice. She had been asked if she was the cleaner. She had been asked, twice a month for a decade, if there was a real doctor available. She had learned when to swallow it, and when to smile through it, and when to simply outlast it, because the work mattered more than her pride. But she had not slept in 4 days, and she had used her last femoral plate, and she had carried 70 pounds of dying animal through the rain on her own back. She walked around the counter. She stopped in front of him, she had to look up to do it, and she did not care. "Do you want to know what I want?" she said. "I want to know who broke his leg. It was broken in 2 places and left to heal wrong, which means it happened weeks before I found him. I want to know who let a wound go septic on an animal that has a chip in his back that any child with a scanner could read. I want to know who left him behind a dumpster in the rain to die alone. Her voice did not rise. That was the frightening part. Because I have been standing here for 3 minutes and you have not asked me one single question about his condition, Mr. Han. Not one. You asked me my price. Silence. So, she said, here it is. My price is that you get out of my clinic. He did not get out. He stood there for a long moment, and then he did something that neither of the men in suits seemed to expect. He went down on one knee, in that coat, on her cracked and bleach-stained floor. He did not call the dog. He just knelt, and he held out his hand, and he waited. Moose looked at him. Then Moose crossed the room, on 3 good legs and 1 rebuilt one, and pushed his head into that outstretched hand, and made a sound that Alexia had never heard him make. Not a bark, not a whine, something that came up out of the chest. And Han Yi-won, heir to Decent Group, the man on the side of the building, put his forehead against a stray dog's head and did not move. Alexia turned around and told Tessa to go home. She made coffee, she did not know why. It seemed like something her father would have done. He talked for an hour. He talked like a man who had not talked in a very long time. The dog had been his mother's. Han Mi-suk, who had come to Chicago with a husband and a shipping company and no English, and who had bought a Jindo puppy in the last year of her life, against her husband's wishes and against her doctor's advice, because she had said she wanted something in that house that was happy to see her. She had named him Namu. It means tree for the pine, she said, because pine stays green in the winter when everything else gives up. She had died in February. Yi-won had been in Frankfurt in a meeting about a shipping contract, and he had gotten the call and had not been able to get a flight for 11 hours, and he had sat in an airport lounge and not cried because there were people from the company in the room. The dog had waited at the door for her, for weeks. And in June, Yi-won said, I came back from a trip and he was gone. I was told he had run out through the service gate, that the staff had searched, that these things happen. He turned the coffee cup a quarter turn on the table without drinking from it. I hired people, real people. 4 months, doctor, not one photograph, not one sighting. A white Jindo in Chicago with a chip in his back, and in 4 months nothing. Alexia said carefully, Mr. Han. Nobody found him because nobody was allowed to find him. He looked up. That leg wasn't an accident, she said. I've set 1,000 legs. I know what a car does, and I know what a fall does, and I know what a person with something heavy in their hand does. And that chip wasn't hidden. Somebody kept him somewhere for weeks. And when he became inconvenient, they put him out. The silence went on for a long time. Say the rest of it, he said. You know the rest of it. Alexia looked at him steadily. Somebody in your house wanted that dog gone, and the only question that matters is why a dog was worth that much trouble to somebody. He left that night without the dog. Alexia had expected a fight. Instead, he had stood at the door for a while, watching Moose sleeping under the reception desk, and had said, without turning around, he's not strong enough to move yet. Is he? No. Then I'll come back. Mr. Han, she had hesitated. What you asked me earlier about the number. I know, his jaw tightened. I'm not going to apologize for it because an apology would be cheap and you'd know it and I'd know it. He opened the door. I'll do something better. 9 days later, the notice went up on her door. Alexia found it at 7 in the morning, taped to the glass, in the kind of language that is designed to be understood only after the deadline has passed. The building had been sold. The block had been sold. Redevelopment, 90 days. At the bottom of the page was the name of the purchasing company, and underneath that, in small gray letters, the parent company. Decent Group. Alexia stood in the cold with the paper in her hand for a very long time. Mrs. Cowell came down and read it over her shoulder and said a word in Polish that Alexia had never heard the old woman use before. 90 days, Mrs. Cowell said. I've been here 51 years, 90 days. Tessa cried. Alexia did not. Alexia went inside and sat down at the desk and looked at the dog asleep on the floor and felt something inside her go quiet and hard. She had spent an hour making coffee for that man. She had sat across from him and let him talk about his mother, and she had believed every word, because she was 34 years old and she still, apparently, had not learned the one lesson her whole life had been trying to teach her. That when a man like that says he will do something better, he means better for him. So he had done it politely. He had not taken the dog by force. He had simply bought the ground she was standing on. When he came back the next evening, she had Moose's file ready in a folder on the counter. Along with the leash and the medication schedule and the x-rays, everything documented and clean, the way her father had taught her. "Take him," she said. Yi-won stopped in the doorway. "What?" "He's fit to travel. He should have the plate reviewed in 6 weeks. Take him and go." "Doctor, take your dog, Mr. Han," she said, "and get off my property. You've got 89 days. I'd like to spend them working." "Let me stop right here and put a question to you, because I have been turning it over myself." Alexia just handed back the one thing that made her want to get out of bed in the morning, and she did it standing in front of a man who could have wiped away every problem she has with the stroke of a pen. Would you have done that? Would you have had the spine for it? Be honest with me in the comments. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it now, because we are nowhere near finished. And what happens next surprised even me. He took the dog. He took the dog because she made him, because she stood there with her arms folded and her face like stone and would not look at him, and because Moose went to her twice on the way out and twice she pushed him away with the flat of her hand and said, "Go on." The last thing she saw was the dog looking back at her through the rear window of that black car. Then she went inside and threw up. For 6 days she worked. She saw every patient. She took every call. She was, by every measure that could be measured, fine. On the 7th day, Mrs. Cowell found her at 2 in the morning, sitting on the floor of the recovery room next to an empty kennel, and did not say a single word about it. The old woman simply sat down on the floor beside her, 78 years old, joints like gravel, and stayed there until the sun came up. On the 9th day, at 4:10 in the morning, something hit the clinic door. Alexia came down the stairs with her heart going like a hammer, and pulled the blind, and there, filthy, soaked, shaking, with blood on 3 paws and a hind leg he was not putting weight on, stood Moose. She got the door open, and he came through it and simply collapsed against her legs. He had come from the house on a store street. Later, she would look at a map, and she would trace it with her finger, and she would sit down very suddenly in her chair. 8 miles, across the river, across 11 lanes of expressway, across a city he had been driven through exactly once in the back of a car, sedated for part of it at night. On a rebuilt leg. Alexia Whitfield held that dog on the floor of her clinic at 4 in the morning and did what she had not done at her father's funeral, and had not done when the notice went up, and had not done when the car pulled away. She wept. Which is how Han Yi-won found her 40 minutes later, coming through the door without knocking, without the suits, in a sweater and a 2-day beard, having driven himself, having searched every street between his mother's house and hers. He stopped dead. Alexia looked up at him from the floor with her arms around his dog and her face wrecked, and she said the only thing she had left. "He chose." And Yi-won said, "I know." He sat down on the floor, in her clinic, at 5 in the morning, and he told her the part he had spent 9 days finding out. "My uncle," he said, "is deputy chairman. He has run the American Property Division for 19 years. When my mother got sick, she started asking questions about that division, not because she suspected anything, because she was bored and she was dying and she wanted something to do." His hands were shaking slightly. He noticed and stopped it. She kept her papers in her study. She wouldn't use the company system. She was old-fashioned. She wrote things down. "What happened to the papers?" They were lost in the week after the funeral, along with a great many other things from that room. My uncle handled the estate. I was told it was a kindness, that I shouldn't have to. He looked at the dog. The only thing that came out of that study intact was Namu, because the staff didn't know what to do with him, so they put him back in the yard. Alexia went very still, and then he became inconvenient. He was in that room every day for a year. He was the only living thing that had been. Yiwon's voice was almost gentle, which made it worse. You asked me why a dog was worth that much trouble. Doctor, he wasn't. That's what I couldn't understand for 9 days. Nobody hurts a dog to keep a secret. A dog can't testify. Then why? Because my uncle isn't a careful man, he's a frightened one, and frightened men don't do arithmetic. He finally looked at her. He didn't have the dog taken because the dog knew something. He had it taken because I loved it, because he needed to know whether I would look, whether I would turn over the house. He put a hand on the one thing of hers I had left to see if I would make a sound. Alexia understood then, in a rush that made her cold. And you didn't, she said. I hired investigators and I sat in meetings and I signed what he put in front of me. Han Yiwon, worth $11 billion on paper, said it with the flatness of a man reading his own verdict. For 4 months, I made a sound like a man who could be managed, and he heard it and he relaxed and he moved on to the next thing. And the building. The building, he almost laughed. It was not a good sound. Doctor, the building is his. The redevelopment is his division. He bought your block 11 days after I walked into your clinic, not to punish you, to move me. He met her eyes. He wanted me to come here and be the man with the checkbook. He wanted me to fix it so that you'd be grateful and I'd feel large and I'd stop asking about my mother's study. It's what he's done my whole life. He hands me something to be generous with, so I don't notice what he's taking. Alexia sat there on the floor with a dog's head in her lap and a billionaire's confession in her ears, and she asked the only question that mattered. So what are you going to do? Yiwon stood up. He looked down at the dog and then at her, and for the first time since she had met him, the closed door was standing wide open. I'm going to make a sound, he said. It took 9 weeks. Alexia read about most of it in the paper, the way everybody else did. A federal investigation into Decent Group's American Property Division. A forensic audit. A deputy chairman walked out of a building on Wacker Drive in handcuffs at 8 in the morning, in front of cameras, which is a thing that happens to men who have spent 19 years believing it could not happen to them. His mother's papers were never found. They didn't need to be. It turned out that Han Di-ho had been so careful about paper that he had done everything else on a phone. What Alexia did not read in the paper was this: that the redevelopment notice came off her door on a Tuesday in December, and that Mrs. Cowell stood on the sidewalk and shouted at it for 4 full minutes, in a manner both triumphant and obscene, while the whole block watched. That Han Yiwon came to the clinic every Thursday, at first with an excuse, and then, eventually, without one. That he was hopeless, that he did not know how to sit in a plastic chair, that he once held a Pomeranian for her during an examination with the expression of a man defusing a bomb, and Tessa had to leave the room. That he learned that by February he could hold a cat properly and knew where the gauze was and had stopped wearing the coat. That one night in March, sitting on her step at midnight eating fried chicken out of a box, he said, "My mother would have liked you. She'd have been unbearable about it." And Alexia laughed so hard she had to put the box down. That neither of them said anything for a while after that, and that when he finally did say it, he said it badly and quietly, and looking at the ground, in the manner of a man who had negotiated billion-dollar contracts and had never once had to ask for something he actually wanted. That she made him wait a full 10 seconds before she answered, on purpose. They opened the Han Mi-suk Memorial Animal Hospital 11 months later, 2 streets over, in a building that did not lean. It has 4 surgical suites and a wing for strays that operates at a loss, permanently and by design, which is written into its founding documents in language that no board will ever be able to unwrite. Alexia runs it. She refused the title of director twice and took it the 3rd time only when she was allowed to write the hiring policy herself. Tessa is in her final year of veterinary school, on a scholarship she does not know the origin of and has never asked about. Mrs. Cowell comes every morning at 9 with a thermos of coffee and an opinion, and the staff have learned that the correct response is to agree with her immediately. And in the corner of the reception hall, on a bed that costs more than Alexia's first car, there is an old white Jindo with a titanium plate in his femur and a great deal of gray coming in around his muzzle. He is 13 now. He sleeps most of the day. He has, according to the entire staff, an unreasonable amount of authority for a dog. There is a small brass plate on the wall above him. It is in Korean, and it does not say his name, and most people walk past it without stopping. It says he stayed green in the winter. Nobody in that building can explain, to a visitor's satisfaction, why a dog is the one who gets a plaque. But if you ask Dr. Alexia Whitfield, and people do ask, because it's a strange thing to have on a wall, she will look up from her chart, and she will look at that dog for a moment, and she will smile in a way that makes you feel like you've walked in on something. And she will say, because he's the one who found me. And that is the story. If it moved you, if somewhere in there you caught yourself hoping for these 2, then do 3 small things for me. Tap that like button. Subscribe if you have not already. And leave me a comment telling me the part that stayed with you, because that is how I know which story to bring you next. There is another one waiting for you on your screen right now. I will see you there.